I want to ask you a question this morning. If you were able to reach out and touch the tassels of Jesus' garment, what is that impossible thing that you would ask Jesus for? What is it? What's the impossible thing in your life that you're just desperate to see Jesus do? Now, I'm not talking about treating God like a genie in the bottle and saying, oh yeah, I can touch the tassel and get myself a Porsche. I'm talking about real stuff that God really cares about. I mean, is there a relationship in your life that you thought was just impossible to mend? There's someone who you thought it would be just impossible for you to forgive? Is there a healing that you need and you thought this is just impossible to take care of? You have a work situation that doesn't look like it's going to be working out and you think this is just impossible for me to be dealing with. I wonder if there's a person that you're trying to reach. I think it's just impossible to reach that guy. I want you to know a truth that the woman discovered, and that is in Jesus there is more power than you realize. Even in the very tassels of the garment, there is more power than you realize that's there. I mean, I know I've had times of writing off situations or people who I thought it was just impossible. It was just too much for God to be able to take care of this. One of those people was my father-in-law. I just thought it would be impossible for God to be able to reach him, Kelly's dad. And going back to the time when Kelly and I were in our 20s, Kelly's dad was one of those people you thought was impossible. It wasn't because he was like a face down in the gutter drug addict kind of a guy. You know, those people, God is reaching people in that all the time. That doesn't even feel that impossible because God reaches all kinds of people in all types of situations. Kelly's dad seemed like he was impossible because he was so successful. He didn't seem to have any needs there. Kelly's dad was 9 years old when his dad died. And so he went to work at 9 years old in a grocery store in order to help make ends meet for his family. And he worked his way up through the grocery business from the time he was 9 years old until he became an executive vice president for a food brokerage firm in the Chicago suburbs. And he did quite well in terms of being able to provide for his family. And so he did well in that area. But in addition to that kind of success, he was also a very moral person. I mean, he was a stand-up guy. He had high respect as a person of integrity in the business community, took care of people, kept his word, all of those kinds of things. He was a moral guy. In fact, when I first met him, he would talk about himself as being a good Christian person. You know, I'm a good Christian person. And the truth is, on the moral scale, if you compared him to a lot of his peers, you know, he really was a very moral kind of a person. If that wasn't enough, he also went to church. And he went to a church that I would say it's possible for you to meet God and get saved in, for sure. But it's not the kind of place that was teaching the Bible in a way that it rubbed up against your life and caused you to be uncomfortable and have life change every single week. And so he wasn't moving forward. It's possible in that place to just kind of enjoy being a good Christian person and walk away unchanged week after week. I thought, here's a guy who's successful, moral, church-going. Why is he ever going to believe in his life that he needs God to come in and intervene? Because what he hadn't done is he hadn't said, God, I need you to come in and rescue me from my mess. I'm going to trust in Jesus and Jesus alone to be the one who makes me acceptable to God. He was still trusting in himself and his good deeds to be acceptable to God. Well, there was a business guy friend who called him up one day or talked to him one day and said, you know what, I don't think you're really getting out of your church what you need to get out of church. Why don't you come and visit me with my church one day? And so he did, and he went to this place called Newcastle Bible Church. And that guy taught from the Bible every single week. And it started to make him feel a little bit uncomfortable because there was some dissonance between his life and what the Bible had to say. And he would go to this pastor after sermons sometimes, and he would say things like, now, why is it that we have to be born again? I mean, why can't you just be a good Christian person? And the pastor would explain to him, because in God's economy, it's not about you being good enough for God. It's not about the things that you do in order to be able to get to God. It's about what Jesus has done for you in coming to rescue you and die on your behalf. It's not about achieving favor in God's sight. It's about accepting Jesus to be the one who comes in and rescues you. And he just kind of let that that teaching bother him for a while. Well, while he's in the middle of this, he gets some heart issues. Not a heart attack, but enough that they would go in and look at it and realize that he needed triple bypass surgery. So he goes in, gets triple bypass surgery, and he's placed in a double room as he's in recovery. And the night that he's got triple bypass surgery, the guy in the bed next to him dies. And he realizes, I'm not sure if I'm ready to face that moment. Well, a few days later, he gave us a call, and he said, hey, can you guys come on over to my house and help me set up a treadmill? Doctors say I need to be exercising on the treadmill. I can't set it up for myself. Can you come by and help out with that? And we were happy to do that. Now, I need to let you know that my father-in-law was not only, moral and smart and going to church, he was also tough. He was a tough guy. As a matter of fact, when I went to ask Kelly for her hand ask Kelly's parents for her hand in marriage, the first thing that he said to me was, what if I say no? And then the second thing that he asked me was, how do you plan to provide for my daughter? And my answer was something like, well, I'm going to be in college for another year, so I was kind of hoping she'd provide for me this year. Which went over big. Anyway, he calls us and he says, hey, I need this treadmill to be set up. Can you come and set up this treadmill for me? And of course we said, yeah, and I'm happy to be like good son-in-law, bring my little toolkit over. And when we get there, he says, I actually really didn't call you to set up the treadmill. Come on into the living room. And we sat down in the living room, and he told us the story about what had happened in the hospital. And he said, while I was lying there in that bed, I realized that my whole life, it's like I had been in a doorway, and Jesus was inviting me to come through, but I just kind of stayed in the doorway, and I never walked across. And he said, I want to cross the doorway now. And you guys have had such a deep influence in my life. This was Kelly and me and Kelly's mom. He said, I wanted you to be here with me when I walked through the door. And so I was bawling, and Kelly's bawling, and we all pray together. And it's one of the great moments of my life because I saw something that I thought was impossible for God to accomplish. And there it happened right in front of my eyes because there's nothing that's impossible for God. Amen?